Hello, welcome to my video. I decided to go with concept 2 of this project, and that is compared to different countries. I decided to do United States, and I also decided to do Russia. Now, the concepts that I'm going to be talking about is poverty, right? I'm going to be talking about GDP, consumer spending, and I'm also going to be talking about standard living. Now, when it comes to standard living, specifically, I'm going to be doing, the spending and the involvement of healthcare. And we'll also be talking about the educational system, exactly. Now, when it comes to the healthcare in Russia, Russia has poor healthcare. When it comes to healthcare in Russia, they don't have the funding that is needed for their healthcare to be successful in that country. They don't have the equipment. They don't have like the skill levels that they need to be successful when it comes to healthcare. And you would think that Russia would find that such an issue of having low healthcare, and they would, put the spending when it comes to the GDP's consumer spending, they will put that into healthcare. Now, a thing when it comes to U.S. spending, U.S. spend like $1.1 trillion in 2018 on healthcare. 583 billion went towards Medicaid. No, I'm sorry, actually Medicare. 399 billion went to Medicaid, and veterans received about 70 billion as well. So, when it comes to the USA, they tend to we're constantly making sure that we're tending to financially to healthcare as well, because we want to have healthcare. We find that an importance to have. So that's like the compare and the contrast. They both similarly have healthcare, but the contrast is that United States has better healthcare than Russia does. Now, when it comes to the education, the educational system in Russia, they don't have the grade levels set the way that we do in the United States. From the ages of 6 to 10, they go to a primary school. And then once they hit 10 years old, they go to a senior school. And then once they're 15, that's when they're done. And that is when they go to college if they want to. Now, the bad thing about their system is that their education is mostly based on a state exam test that they're supposed to take. And that is to, determine whether or not they receive free education. And even though they do have the rights in that country of free education, such as, college and stuff, that's all paid for. But this state exam is supposed to determine if they are to receive that for college versus, primary school or, anything like that type of sort. Now, when it comes to how U.S. has a better education, is that 42 of the 100 top colleges in the world, that is actually in the U.S. And then when it comes to international students, they most likely want to go to the U.S. because the U.S. has better college and educational opportunities. Now, as well, let me talk about the cons of education in the U.S. versus Russia, okay? There is not free education when it comes to college in the U.S. You have to worry about tuition costs. You have to worry about, college, such as dorms, where you are. And you have to worry about the career-wise. Now, international students, they have a hard time when it comes to going to college in the United States because they have to worry about, well, how are they going to be able to, start their careers if they're not originally from the U.S. They also don't have good social benefits because they don't have, social security like we, the way that it's set in our country. They also have to deal with, the problems of healthcare as well, healthcare insurance. How are they able to do that if they're basically immigrants? So that's the bad thing when it comes to our educational system versus Russia's educational system. And that goes for any other country or any, person who is from out of the country trying to attend a college in the US. They're going to have to deal with these things such as getting visas and making sure that they're legally allowed to be in the state to attend college. Now, another thing that I want to talk about is the poverty rates between both countries. Now, When it comes to the poverty rate in Russia, the poverty in Russia is basically about 1/5 of the country. That's how many people are being affected. And that is not really a good amount. You would really want no poverty. I think anybody in the world would want no poverty at all. Now, although, people are able to still afford clothes, they're still able to afford, food, they can't afford non-essential items, which means that there's not exactly a lot of consumer spending. That way, this is bad because if they're in recession, they're not going to be able to do much consumer spending because they can't afford those things. They can barely even afford the things that they actually do need. Now, when it comes to, statistics, in 2017, their poverty rate was 13.2%. This was in Russia. Now, when it comes to the poverty rate in the U.S., it was 11.7 in 2017. I'm sorry, 2018. But in 2017, it was 12.3%. Now, when you think to the actual amount of people, in 2018, 38.1 million people were in poverty. And it's like with the pandemic now, there's a lot of people who are unemployed, which puts many people at risk for being dealing with poverty. And it's a sad thing. And, that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about is bringing the attention of the contrast of these countries both have when it comes to poverty. But the U.S. has a better, lower percentage of when it comes to the poverty rate versus Russia. Now, for the GDP consumer spending, okay? One thing I also want to bring up when it comes to the consumer spending in Russia. This was in 2012. This shows, each category that, Russian put towards, the consumer spending of the GDP. And as you can see, total expenditures, you probably can't see it closely, but total expenditures, that was the highest one. Now, when it comes to healthcare and education, as you see, education, healthcare, that is lower. And then education is higher than healthcare. Now, when it comes to spending as well, percentage, 2016, from 1992 to 2016, this shows from Russia, United States, and this also shows the European Union. And the United States is the brown line, and the Russian Federation, that's the blue line. Now the European Union, that's this green line. As you can tell, Russia had a higher thing of spending than the U.S. in 2016 towards the end. Now, another thing that I also wanted, as I was saying before, I want to talk about, GDP consumer spending when it comes to comparing both of these countries and how they do it. Russia spent at least $818.84 billion in consumer spending in 2018 to 2019. But there was a significant notice of that their consumer spending and GDP had a very noticeable increase than it did their previous year. And, that brought the U.S.'s attention because that was a drastic increase, which, caused them to wonder, where did they get this increase in GDP? And, now Russia is in a recession because over time, the consumer spending went down pretty quickly. Now, the U.S. spent $3.30 trillion in 2019 in consumer spending. And that's about 17% of the GDP. And although this percentage seems low, this is actually, it's a good average percentage, when it comes to consumer spending of the whole entire GDP spending. Okay? Now, the federal government spent $1.28 trillion in 2019 as well. And this went towards, the military. Now, one thing I also want to talk about when it comes to the poverty, back to the poverty as well, is that you notice this is a graph showing that Russians face increasing poverty. Okay, and this is from 2000 to 2016. Now you notice that in the 2000, it was at nearly 30% in poverty. Okay. Now, when it came to it being 2016, it was nearly 16% in poverty. And although that is a good increase, you start to notice that there is a shift. There is a shift. That tells you that, yeah, the poverty in Russia is not exactly huge, but it's also not at a good percentage the way that it needs to be. If anything, I personally believe that poverty should be non-existent. And although it is an uncontrollable thing, there are many ways that we can make over time to help improve that. Now, when it comes to the poverty in the U.S., this is from 1959 to 2017. In 2017, it says 12.3%. Now, when it comes to the actual numbers, that's 39.7 million percent. Now, if you didn't notice, although it shows and doesn't exactly show the actual time frames both together, 2016, the poverty percentage was nearly 16%. But in this one, it was 12.3% in 2017. That tells you that even then, U.S. still had a lower poverty rate. Thank you for watching my video. I wanted to compare and contrast these two countries because although they do have major differences, you know, U.S. basically is more of a better environment economy when it comes to their GDP and how they handle their GDP and things in their economics system versus Russia. They both still have some similarities and major differences. And I wanted to bring that attention as well. Thank you for watching my video. And yeah, have a good day.